Hello friends and welcome back. I'm Nick and this is MSFS Flight Plans, a channel dedicated to not just having a whole lot of fun and a whole lot of different aircraft, but also exploring some of the most fascinating places on Earth. And every now and then we get lucky enough to stumble across something so incredible that you can't help but wonder how you never knew it existed. And I think today I found one of those for us. We're out in south central Brazil, where I have discovered an enormous and absolutely beautiful impact crater out in the remote countryside of the state of Minas Gerais. And I'll show you precisely where that is on a map in just a minute. And it just so happens we need a fast plane that does not need a big runway for this one, so why would we not take the new Dornier Do-31? Because if you did not already know it, this thing can take off vertically. Kind of. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. So I'm sure you've probably seen this. It's been out for, what, I don't know, 4 or 5 days now, and all the usual guys have done the reviews for it, so I'm not going to spend the time doing that, but I have only flown this. This is probably my 10th time because I had to abort about 6 previous recordings because I was still trying to figure this thing out. So we will go through the startup procedure because I'm still trying to learn it myself, and it's really not that complicated, but it does take just a few minutes. So let's go ahead and get that started. All we need to do is get the battery going first, and then we'll jump down here, and we have to start the engine startup procedure, which is under this special little cover here. This will get the left engine going. And we have to wait for the N2 to spool up to at least 10%. It says wait till it gets to 18, but I feel like it never really gets there before you introduce the fuel. So once it gets over 10, we'll kick the fuel on. And I'm not going to do, any in-depth reviews of this thing because that's not what we do around here, but I think this is a fantastic looking plane. Also by iniBuilds, who made that last plane that we flew, that flying wing from the 1940s that we took over Tehran. And what kind of stymies me about this plane versus that one is that that one was almost 26 bucks, and this one's $9.99 in the sim. Granted, it is on sale, but even at full price, I think it was like $14. And even though that other plane is really cool, I feel like this one is of even higher quality, particularly with the interior detailing. I mean, you can hop in the back and it looks good. With the other one, there was some stuff, once you look down from your main view, that wasn't really phenomenal. I feel like this thing is just polished all the way through. Okay, turn the fuel on there. And then we have to wait for our exhaust temp to get to the green, which it did there. So now we can turn the starter off for that one and get our other engine going here. But this thing is cool. And you kind of think, oh, this isn't a great field of view, which is kind of important on this channel, but the thing we're going to be looking at, that huge crater, is going to be off to our left as we're going. And we got to get up to about 20,000 feet. And I'll show you what that looks like on the map here. And just, let's just do that now while this engine's running up. Let's look at the map real quick. So here's Brazil. Here's where we are. And let's see, Rio is here, and then... well, where is it now? It's kind of disappeared. Sao Paulo, there it is, right down there. We took a flight out there not too long ago. So first, to find our place we need to go to, we find Uberlandia right here, which may or may not have a bunch of Uber drivers. And then we have to look over here for Patrocinio. And you see that, if you got a big screen, you can see it. See that little slightly darker green spot there? That's the crater, which is really big. And we're going to take off from a town that's, we've got to zoom in a little bit more here. Get some of these to pop up. Serra do Salitre. And we're going to just fly straight out a runway heading up to about 20,000 feet. Right when we get next to that thing, we're going to have to start coming back down because we're going to land at a runway just north of Patrocinio down here. And the whole flight will probably be less than 20 minutes. Not too long at all, but we have to climb really fast, which this thing can do without any problems. And let's go ahead and get that other engine started up. Whoop, not that one. There, we got way too many switches down there. Okay, so that'll get this thing going. Okay, so this runway is about 3,200 feet, and this thing is kind of big and lumbering, and it would not be able to get up in the air in time. I tried it if we did not have the kind of vertical takeoff capabilities with this. So without going into too many details about how that works, the first thing you have to do is just push this I think it's called a co-pilot assist button, and that will get those engines on the wingtips fired up. And while that's going on, let's get all of our fuel pumps on, all 10 of them. This thing has 10 jet engines in it. Awesome. There we go. Man, my finger's getting tired from clicking all those. And then we'll just introduce the fuel for the tip engines. And come up here, hit our generators. That was one of the reasons why I had to abort a previous flight. My batteries died about 10 minutes into it. So that won't happen this time. Okay, so when I first got in this thing, and by the way, there's a great tutorial among the many others that's actually produced by iniBuilds, and the additional help with that one is it will show you how to configure your controls, even if you have just a joystick, if you don't have a full throttle quadrant, or even an Xbox controller, so check that out. It's easy to find. And the way that this works is once you push that button, this knob right here, this lever, is connected to my throttle number 3 position. And once you push that little button up on the glare shield, you can see that when you move that one, it will also move all the other throttles and everything. So really all you have to do is move that throttle number 3 to get into hover mode. And then once it shuts itself off, your regular throttles will work and you don't have to touch it again. And we are going to do a traditional landing because it just kind of takes a while. It's not real hard to do a vertical landing. It just takes a while to get slowed down and everything. And the runway is slightly longer. It's just about 4,000 feet, which will probably be just enough to get this thing down. So we're going to do a traditional landing just for the sake of time. And when I first got in this, before I had seen any tutorials or anything, I figured this would shoot up in the air like a helicopter or something, but it doesn't. It just barely gets off the ground, which is all it really needs to do. And granted, we are at almost 4,000 feet, so let's get our baro check there. So I feel like I took a flight down on the coast before this in Central America, and it got up a little bit easier, but we are at almost 4,000, so I feel like it's going to struggle a little bit, but all it needs to do is come up just a hair. So we're going to go ahead and give that full nozzle 90 degrees down. And here we go, starting to come up in the air. And you just kind of pull back on the stick. And ever so slightly, it'll come up. And after it's up, then you just start giving it the forward throttles. And it'll actually take flight, without having to need the vertical thrust at about 120 knots. So we're just going to try to get to that point. Once we get close to that, we can start dialing back the vertical thrusts. And then we'll be up in the air. Okay, so gears up. And we don't need any flaps, so flaps are up. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my parking brake off now because last time, in one of the previous flights, I forgot that too. And as you're going to see, the scenery out here is really nice. Looks real good. Out here in the middle of nowhere, South America. Mostly farmland, but it looks really good. And this is the live weather, by the way. All right, so I've got it up to full throttle. Now we just need to get some horizontal flight to get some straightforward speed going. I'm going to start dialing back those tip thrusters to get the nose down some. And we're crossing over 120 knots. Keep dialing those back. And we're good. All right, so those will shut. The little doors on the tip thrustles will shut, and we'll start picking up some speed pretty good here. So we're going to climb at 4,000 feet a minute, and you will see this thing will be able to maintain over 200 knots, no problem, even at 4,000 feet a minute. And I'm just looking at our heading right here. We need to keep that around 4 degrees. And look at that scenery down there. Just beautiful. And it's not totally flat either. It's not like flying over the Grand Canyon, but they do have some nice little canyons and rivers down here. And even a little dam, which I was having trouble finding. I'll show you where that is at the end on the satellite map. Look at that. You can even see little rows of whatever they got growing down there. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I don't know why South America looks so incredibly good in the sim, but it sure does. So look at this. We're over 250 knots. In fact, I need to pull the throttle back. Right over here, you can see we're in the red. And there's a little bit of a lag with that, so if you pull it back too much, next thing you know, you've gone too far, so it'll slowly come back down now, I think. Just continue to try to climb at about 4,000. And if you want some assist, of course, we're hardcore, so we're not going to do that. These 3 buttons right here, or levers, you can flick those and you'll get some assist with takeoff, but as you can see, it wasn't too tough to do it, so I just left those off. And if you want to fly by navigation, you can't do GPS navigation. There's a little screen down there if you feel like you want to use it. It can do radio nav and ILS landings, but it can't do GPS navigation. And we won't really need it for this flight. We can VFR this one. So we're just going to keep coming up until we see the crater. Then we're going to circle to the west and start coming back down. And we're way too far off this direction, so let's come on back over here. So there is going to be one little town that we'll see up here. And that is Serra do Salitre, which means Saltpeter Mountain. And it was named that in 1675 when a Portuguese explorer noticed the region's waters were very sulfurous. I don't know if he tasted them or smelled them or what. And since sulfur and saltpeter usually pair quite nicely to make gunpowder, I guess they figured that just calling it saltpeter would be close enough for anybody who cared. And if I can lean up and up, there's a little town right down there. And that thing has got 11,000 people in it for that tiny little town, so they must be packed in there pretty tight. And all these fields down here are growing mostly coffee, corn, and soybeans. So all those rows that look kind of like corn rows are probably corn rows. And I guess they do a lot of cattle wrangling down there too. I read the ratio of cattle to humans is about 5 to 1. They got over 50,000 head of cattle out there in that little tiny town, which is a lot. And you'd think if they had that many cows, there'd be some more fields that weren't green, because usually when those things are stomping around, unless they got them really spread out, you got a really brown little field out there. Alright, so now I'm just trying to correct back to our heading, and we'll see this crater here in just a minute. And this is perfect weather for this flight. When I had to abort all my flights last night, it was a little bit too overcast, and we couldn't fly with the live weather, but we're not having any problems now. Alright, so our RPMs look good. We're back under the yellow zone there, so that's fantastic. And in just a minute, we'll see our crater, which is called the Cratera de Patrocinio, which is named after that town where we're going to be landing. and it is big. And I had a heck of a time finding this thing. First, I just had to search for craters, and I was looking all over the place out here for them because I'd flown over this a long, long time ago. Couldn't remember where it was. Finally found it in Google, and then I had to try to find it in little NavMap so I could figure out what airports are near it, and there it is right over there. See, this is the outer walls over here. This thing is 8 miles across. So that is big, really big. And because it's so remote, it was really hard to find out much information about it. I only know it's 8 miles across because I could measure it in little NavMap, and then I just measured the difference in the AGL altitude as I was coming across it, and it only gets to about 300 feet deeper than the highest rim of this thing. But because so few people have been out here to check it out, they weren't even really sure that it wasn't volcanic. But as you can see, just looking at it, it looks pretty much like a meteorite strike to me, and most people agree that it probably is these days. But look at that thing. Huge, absolutely huge. And because it's so eroded for something that big, I'm guessing it's probably pretty old, though I couldn't find any even guesstimates of how old it was or how big the thing was that made it. But just judging from our usual ratios of size of the object versus size of the crater, I would say maybe around a mile in diameter, maybe a little bit less, which would have been a big blast. Alright, so now we're just going to cut the throttle and start coasting back down because we got to get back down to our airport, which is going to be right on this side of this town over here. But look at that thing. As I've said before, and I think I probably say it on all of our crater flights, the thing I love about these is that all of them are unique. They're like fingerprints. They all just have different features. Even some of similar size and similar age. I guess it just depends on the kind of ground that they're hitting, the size of the object, how fast it's going. And you kind of have to wonder, I imagine they weren't doing too much topographical mapping out here until fairly recently. So it kind of makes you wonder if people even realized that that was a huge circular crater until fairly recently, maybe even until somebody could fly over it. And down here there's also a lot of minerals apparently in this big lake, which is really mostly marsh. There's just, when we see the satellite map, you'll see this part right here, looks like it's deeper. But all the rest of this is pretty marshy and woodsy. And I found a cell phone video that some Portuguese guy had taken out here. I couldn't tell if he was saying it, and he was on the ground, and it looked very woodsy and very marshy. But look at that thing. That is huge. And every time I see one of these, I can't help but also wonder what this area looked like in the weeks and months and years after a hit like that. That would have been cataclysmic. And again, these fields, even when we get closer to them, they just look wonderful. And there's nothing out here, no big cities, out in the middle of nowhere. The only parts of South America, if you've flown down to the southernmost regions, there's some lack of satellite coverage, and you can get up in some of the Andes down by the southern end of Chile and Argentina. They don't look so great, but everything around here just looks amazing, really good. Alright, so we've got a few minutes as we're coasting on in here, so I'll tell you some more info about this plane if you have not already researched it. This one didn't get many production runs, just like that last one we flew out in Iran. We only made 3 of them. The first flight was in 1967, and they mounted to rounds with a prototype for a while, trying to drum up interest in a plane that apparently had a niche in the territories close to Russia during the Cold War. This one's German also, because they were looking for something that could still get up and down if the runways were destroyed in a conflict. And apparently this fit the bill. The problem was that it was very expensive to operate, and apparently a little too complicated for building and maintenance, so they only made the 3 of them and shut the project down in 1970. And I guess the big cost with this, in that iniBuilds tutorial, they said that if you leave those 8 engines on the ends of the wings running for 15 minutes, it'll completely drain the tanks. So a real gas guzzler. And I don't know if you saw it, if you've seen any videos where they do a walk around of the plane, the under the wing engines are not pass-through design. They look like Harrier engines. They have the 4 nozzles on each side of them. And each of those produces about 15,500 pounds of thrust. And I don't know what the Harrier engines produce. And by the way, those Harriers were also, they started building those in 1967 as well. So maybe that was when this kind of technology was first emerging. But that's a lot of thrust to divert at a 90-degree angle. I don't know how they keep those nozzles attached to this thing, because that is some pressure. Okay, before I tell you about this town that we're coming into, a couple reminders. We are amidst our flight recommendation competition, and we've had a few more entries in the past couple days. And you can be a part of that if you join our Discord server, which I will link in our video description. Join all 31 of us that we have in there so far. That place is really fun. do group flights together, chat about all kinds of amazing things, and if you want to recommend a flight, all I need is the departure code, the arrival code for the airports, and a few spots to check out in between. I'll draw up the flight plan if there's enough stuff to see. We'll post the video, and at the end of the quarter, which we're probably a little over halfway through now, we'll vote on the best flight that we've uploaded, and the winner will get a Sim vendor gift card to the vendor of your choice. So right now, we've got 3. We will have 3 very shortly. We've got the flight on the southern coast of Australia that we took in that PC-12, or PC-21 maybe, sorry. And then we've got another flight we're about to take out in Oman. One of our members recommended a place around Muscat up on the northern coast of Oman because there's some mountains south of that which look incredible. We got a really cool strip we're going to land at. And because I can't upload that Budapest flight, I want to give our man Mike Coffey a chance to get in the competition. Anyway, he was the one that originally recommended that Whistler flight that we did a while back, so on his behalf I'm going to submit that one for him just since I cannot get out to Budapest right now until I figure out what the heck is going on with my frame rate issues out there. So we'll upload that one for him, and then anything else that we get in the next month or so, we'll put that in there. It'll be fantastic. Outside of the flight plan competition, some upcoming flights are El Paso still, and Turin, Italy, which looks really cool. We'll take a helicopter flight out there. It is a photogrammetry city. We've got a few add-ons for it. And maybe Detroit. I flew out there recently, and that looks pretty cool too. But it is data heavy, so we'll have to fly. I wanted to fly a helicopter, but it's tough to get the frame rates under control out there. So that's what's on tap. All right, our destination airport is just north of this town of Patrocinio. And this town currently has a population of just under 100,000, and also, as you can tell, has an agriculture-based economy. Okay, so this is our runway right here. And you can see it's not real big, so we're going to have to get down pretty low and slow. And the stall speed on this thing is probably around 140, so I'm just kind of keeping an eye on that right now. And we'll go ahead and get our wheels out just to give us some more drag because we're at gear speed now. Because I don't even want to be coming in this fast. This town got its non-indigenous start in 1793, about 100 years after that first town that we saw, because it was along a route traveled by early explorers looking for gold and slaves. And according to local lore, the town's name comes from the legend of an early wealthy landowner whose daughter fell gravely ill. So he did the only thing he could without medical resources, asking the Blessed Virgin for protection, promising to build a chapel if his daughter was cured. And it turns out the Holy Mother came through, so he built the church, calling it Nossa Senhora de Patrocinio, which means Our Lady of Protection. And I'm going to say a little prayer on our behalf because this runway is not easy to come down on with this thing. If you've ever flown the Osprey, man, it's kind of, I feel kind of like flying that thing, but that thing is impossible. Taking off in the Osprey is not too hard, but landing it is an incredible challenge. Every time I've tried to land that thing, I can't do it without shooting 10,000 feet up in the air as soon as you start tilting those huge rotors up. And I've taken a lot of flights in it, and I can't get any better at it. I'd love to take a flight in it, but it is just too hard to try to land that thing. That's a neat plane, though, or helicopter, or whatever you call it. Okay, so this runway, we're going to try to stay at around 5,000 here. The elevation of this runway is about 3,200 feet. And it is windy. We got a 17-knot direct crosswind. 2 notches out of 4 flaps out. We already got our gears out. Slow down a little bit more. And boy, once you cut the throttle on this thing, when you're close to stall speed, it just drops. All right, full flaps. We're just going to kind of fall out of the sky because I need to take a steep angle of attack to keep our airspeed. And I'm really watching that airspeed. You got to dial it in just right for this runway. Boy, that wind is pushing us. Look at these fields right here. You can see the little rows of corn. I'm guessing that's what that is. Unbelievable. And that town doesn't look too bad if you try to fly in from the south side of it. All right, come on. And it's not real wide either. Probably way too narrow for a plane like this. Oh, that wind. Oh, that wind. And cut the throttle. Flare. And we're down. That is a skinny runway. All right, flaps up. And we'll pull over real quick here, take a look at little NavMap satellite image, just because I want to show you that little dam, which I could not spot. If one of you guys can spot it, I'd love for you to tell me. It's not a little dam either. And it's not too far away from that airport that we took off from. Okay, you know what? Let's just... I'm not going to turn all the way around, so we'll just come over here and park on the side. Look at that scenery. I mean, it's just fantastic. I love finding these places that have no business having scenery like this. That just looks absolutely wonderful. Okay, so what we'll do is just cut the fuel to these engines. That should shut it down just fine. That's good. Parking brake on. And a quick glance at little NavMap. If I can drag it over. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's that crater, and you can see, let's take these airports off, how hard it was to find that thing. Well, I got a bookmark right over it right now. And by the way, our bookmark links, of course, will also be in the video description, along with this exact flight plan, so you don't have to try to find this thing. Just pull it in a little NavMap, and away you'll go. So everything looks just green out here, and you can see that, well, you really can't because that bookmark, but you have to get pretty close to be able to pick out that crater. And there it is once you get close enough. So here's the town that we flew over, that first little one with the 50,000 cattle. And you know what? These look kind of like cattle pens out here, so maybe that's where they got all those things. And that is a lot of cattle. And of course they got their obligatory soccer field down there, football field. But here's what this dam is. This is a big phosphate mine right over here. And look at how steep this thing, I could not find it. So the only thing I can imagine is that this is so new that it wasn't even in the satellite image used to make the map for the sim. But that dam is pretty steep. And if I could have found it, you know that we would have flown over that thing. But look at that. That's up there. And check this thing out. I was thinking this might be a secondary impact crater because there's nothing out here on the landscape that really looks anything like that. They got some valleys and stuff out here, but nothing like that. And I don't know what would have created that, but that looks an awful lot like... It doesn't have the ripples around the side quite as much unless it's a sinkhole or something. And it's kind of oddly shaped, but being that close to the other one, I'm thinking it might be a secondary impact crater, but there's so little info about this that it's very possible they just wouldn't have mentioned anywhere. So on my original flight, I flew out this way over this little canyon land out here, which is just, again, just beautiful. Flew out this way, came in over the southern end of the town and landed, which is a neat little approach if you want to do that. Again, the town looks pretty good if you want to come over that. And of course, they got their stadium too. And that's about it. Fun little flight, not quite short enough to make it a lunch break, but awesome nonetheless. Found another impact crater. Stand by for some more incredible stuff along the way, and I cannot wait to see you all again in the skies. Later.